And that was to destroy East Coast rap. And what I mean by that, and I know people gonna be like, yo, Gene is out of his mind and everything like that. Check this out, brother.
In the moment, it just felt like, what? Like, is this fun for him? Is this like a test?
Shock Gene Deal's claim. For nearly 30 years, the question of who really wanted Tupac gone has haunted hip-hop like a ghost. Theories have swirled, names have been whispered, but no one from inside the circle ever spoke plainly. Until now, Gene Deal, once Diddy's personal bodyguard, has broken the code of silence with claims so direct they sound less like rumor and more like confession. He insists Diddy's issues with Tupac weren't about charts or East Coast pride. They were personal, poisonous, and they carried the weight of a man who, according to Gene, wanted Tupac erased. Here's what makes this so explosive. Gene wasn't a fan on the outside, piecing together headlines. He was right there. He stood behind Diddy at clubs, guarded him at hotels, rode in the cars, and heard the words firsthand. If he's lying, it's the boldest fabrication in hip-hop history. But if he's telling the truth, then one of rap's greatest tragedies wasn't just a feud gone wrong. It was a mission. And Tupac was the marked man.
Sean had to take responsibility for what he did as an individual. Sean is the one who pulled that gun out. Sean is the one who shot. So he has to take responsibility.
The open threats. What stuns people most about Gene Deal's account isn't just what Diddy supposedly felt, but how casually he expressed it. These weren't whispers traded in secret corners or cryptic verses hidden in songs. Gene says the words were spoken out loud, in plain sight, like Diddy wasn't worried who heard him. Tupac, according to Gene, wasn't just a rival. He was a problem that needed to be handled. Now think about this. When someone at the top of the industry speaks with that kind of bluntness, it isn't just trash talk. It reads like intent. And the record doesn't stop with Gene's story. Old court transcripts and police notes show Diddy's name surfacing again and again in connection with million-dollar payouts, bounties, and his fury over Hit 'Em Up. That track, meant as a lyrical strike, may have triggered something far more dangerous. A vendetta fueled by ego, betrayal, and money. If Gene is telling the truth, we aren't looking at a rap feud. We're staring at the blueprint of a man commissioning violence like it was business.
A whole lot of potential. Jay was more quiet. But I mean, I learned that Jay was being quiet because he was taking notes. He was taking notes, observing everything, taking it all in. Because, sometimes you're around and you're watching to see things to do. But some people are.
Court records resurface, and here's where the story stops being just one man's memory. When we dig into the archives, something unsettling comes back to life. Old police files and sealed transcripts have begun resurfacing, and Diddy's name doesn't appear once or twice. It shows up nearly 50 times. Not as background noise, but directly tied to talk of payouts, retaliation, and the promise of money on Tupac's head. Consider the weight of that. These aren't fan theories or YouTube rumors. These are documents built from sworn interviews, preserved in case files that investigators quietly shelved for years. In them, witnesses describe Diddy as willing to spend millions to clear the board, targeting both Tupac and Suge Knight. That isn't competition. That's contract language. But here's the chilling part. Those numbers line up with the sudden, meteoric rise of Bad Boy Records right after Tupac's death. The timing looks less like coincidence and more like payoff. If those accounts hold any truth, then Diddy's empire may have been built not just on platinum records, but on blood.
I don't think they are scared of him. I think they more so, they don't want him to embarrass their reputation and things that they've been known for. You understand?
Shakur's awareness. But before we rush to the night of the shooting, we have to stop and ask, did Tupac already know the storm was closing in? Gene Deal suggests he wasn't naive, that Tupac could feel the crosshairs on his back long before Vegas. Imagine living at the peak of fame, arenas chanting your name, your music reshaping culture, and still walking through each day convinced someone powerful wanted you gone. Here's the twist that flips the narrative. What if Tupac wasn't blindsided that night? What if he was preparing for it? Friends and insiders later hinted he carried an air of paranoia, checking shadows, talking about enemies that weren't abstract, but specific. To some, it sounded like ego. To others, it sounded like survival instinct. And that raises the question, was Las Vegas really an ambush? Or was it the final act of a script Tupac already saw unfolding? If Gene is right, the man we thought was caught off guard may have been bracing himself for the inevitable.
Is to shield his private life.
The missing vest. And this is where the details start to look almost staged. Tupac was known for wearing his protective vest not just on tour, but even at nightclubs and public appearances. He understood the risks that came with fame, with gang affiliations, with open feuds. Yet on the night of the Tyson fight, when tensions were sky high and every reason screamed for caution, he left it behind. No vest, no protection. Now ask yourself why. Was it recklessness, overconfidence, or something far stranger? Some point to arrogance, saying Tupac felt untouchable in that moment. But others suggest it was part of a larger plan, a script that required vulnerability for the illusion to work. If you were going to fake an ending, what better way to sell it than appearing exposed? And that decision, to step into a war zone without armor, keeps echoing, because it wasn't just one bad choice. It looks like a deliberate move. The first piece in a puzzle that would only make sense after the bullets flew. Autopsy oddities. And this is where the official story begins to crack. When the autopsy report finally surfaced, fans immediately noticed details that didn't add up. The listed height and weight were wrong, showing Tupac as taller and heavier than he ever was in real life. To skeptics, those errors weren't sloppy paperwork. They looked deliberate, like someone wanted confusion baked into the record. But that's not even the strangest part. The coroner who handled Tupac's body vanished from the profession almost immediately afterward. No high-profile promotions, no future cases, just gone. Almost as if he'd been erased along with the inconsistencies. And then came Afeni Shakur's cryptic comments. At her son's memorial, she didn't speak in the language of finality. Instead, she hinted that Tupac had chosen his path and left quietly. For grieving fans, those words sounded like poetry, but to others, they felt like a coded admission. Combine the wrong stats, a vanished coroner, and a mother's enigmatic tone. Suddenly, the death certificate feels less like proof and more like a smokescreen. Hospital timeline discrepancies. And just when you think the inconsistencies stop at the morgue, the hospital records open another hole in the story. The official timeline claims Tupac fought for his life for 6 days before passing. But scattered eyewitness accounts, paramedic statements, and even fragments of hospital paperwork don't align. Some reports suggest he was still conscious long after doctors claimed he had slipped into a coma. Others hint that key procedures weren't performed the way they should have been in a high-profile trauma case. Now here's the kicker. Even basic details like the time of arrival, the treatments given, and the moment of death vary depending on which document you read. In cases this public, the record is usually airtight. Yet with Tupac, it's riddled with contradictions. And when you stitch those contradictions together, they don't just look like mistakes, they feel like misdirection. If you were trying to mask a transfer, a disappearance, or a staged outcome, a messy paper trail would be exactly what you'd leave behind. Citing street whispers. And this is where the whispers start to spread beyond Las Vegas. In the months after Tupac's supposed death, reports began surfacing from places he was never meant to be. Havana locals swore they'd seen him wandering open-air markets, blending into crowds with a bandana pulled low. Grainy photos emerged of a man in his 40s with that unmistakable stare, the same piercing eyes, the same smirk that couldn't quite be hidden. Now pause and think about this. Celebrity sightings are common, but with Tupac, they didn't come from a single tip or a tabloid headline. They came in waves, from fans, from investigators, even from private detectives who claimed they had followed the trail to Cuba and beyond. Each sighting should have closed the door with easy debunking, yet the opposite happened. The more people looked, the stranger the accounts became. Instead of dissolving over time, the rumors hardened into folklore, which leaves us asking, were these all just illusions of hope or glimpses of a man who refused to stay buried? Michael Nice's story, but the wildest twist comes from a man named Michael Nice, a supposed security operative who claimed he helped pull off Tupac's escape. According to him, the night didn't end with a body on a gurney. It ended with a double switch, a decoy corpse, and a private flight bound for Havana. Nice said he was part of the extraction team, and that Cuba's leader at the time, Fidel Castro, personally approved safe passage. Now let that sink in. Tupac, a global superstar and the son of Black Panther activists, allegedly vanishing under the protection of one of America's greatest enemies. If true, it wasn't just an escape, it was political theater. Michael Nice promised to release proof, video, documents, even testimony from others who were there. But just before he could go public, he conveniently disappeared, reported dead under suspicious circumstances. Was he silenced? Or was he another player in the long game of deception? His story leaves us staring at a chilling possibility. Maybe Tupac's exit was never just about music. Machiavelli clues. And if Michael Nice's claims sound like fantasy, Tupac himself may have left the blueprint years earlier. Just months before his death, he adopted the alias Machiavelli, a nod to Niccolo Machiavelli, the Renaissance thinker who famously wrote about faking one's own death to outmaneuver enemies. On his album booklet, Tupac printed the haunting phrase, "Exit Tupac, enter Machiavelli." Rearrange those letters and fans point out it spells, "Am alive, K coincidence," or a cryptic confession. But here's what really fuels the fire: the posthumous albums. 7 records released after his supposed passing, each carrying tracks so polished and urgent they sounded freshly recorded, not pulled from a vault. Every drop felt less like scraps from the cutting room floor and more like planned messages, delivered on schedule. It makes you wonder, was this just the legacy of a workaholic artist who stockpiled material? Or was it a man still alive, feeding his voice to the world from a distance? If the latter is true, then Machiavelli wasn't just an alias. It was a prophecy. Police interviews, bounty numbers. And if you thought Gene Deal's S-word stood alone, the paperwork tells an even louder story. When investigators revisited sealed police interviews from the mid-90s, Diddy's name jumped out nearly 50 times. Not once, not twice, dozens. Witnesses described him offering staggering sums of money, even millions, to see Tupac and Suge Knight taken off the board. Now think about what that means. This wasn't petty industry beef. That kind of money signals something bigger, a calculated strike, more mob play than music rivalry. It was the language of business, where lives could be bargained the same way as record deals. And here's where it gets chilling. The timeline of those alleged offers overlaps almost perfectly with Bad Boy Records' sudden explosion of power. While Tupac's empire crumbled in the wake of the Vegas shooting, Diddy's label was rising like a rocket. Coincidence? Maybe. But when the interviews and the success line up side by side, it looks less like luck and more like the prophet of silence, the Shadow Crew. And here's where the story darkens even further. Whispers from insiders claim Diddy didn't move alone. Behind the polished suits and flashy parties, there was allegedly a hidden circle. A Shadow Crew some describe bluntly as a hit squad. Their role? To sweep away problems money couldn't solve, to silence voices that got too close, and to make sure enemies never lived long enough to strike back. Now picture this: multiple witnesses tied to Tupac's case. People who once seemed ready to testify suddenly vanished or went silent. Some refused to speak, others became unreachable, a few even turned up dead. And in more recent court filings tied to Diddy's current scandals, the same pattern repeats. Victims disappearing, attorneys cutting ties, prosecutors admitting they can't locate witnesses. This isn't just coincidence stacking up. It's a blueprint. The same machinery working decade after decade. And if that Shadow Crew truly existed, then Gene Deal's words weren't warnings. They were confirmations of a system designed to protect its king at all costs. Escape to Cuba. And this is where the conspiracy leaps from street corners to international politics. Multiple insiders, including former security operatives, have claimed Tupac didn't die in Las Vegas. He was flown out under the protection of Fidel Castro himself. The connection isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. Tupac's family was deeply tied to Black Panther activism, and his aunt Assata Shakur has lived in Cuba for decades under Castro's asylum. To those in the know, it wouldn't be shocking for the Cuban leader to extend the same refuge to her nephew. Now imagine that trade-off. One of the most magnetic voices in music, a man who could move crowds with a single verse, suddenly reduced to living in silence on a guarded island. No more tours, no more cameras, no public spotlight. If the accounts are true, Castro allowed Tupac to stay but under strict conditions. No open music, no public appearances, and above all, no confirmation that he was alive. It paints a picture not of freedom, but of survival in exile. A life saved, but a legacy frozen in time. Suppression patterns. And just when the trail seems ready to break open, it collapses under strange, repeating patterns. Take Michael Nice, the man who swore he helped smuggle Tupac to Cuba. He promised evidence, even video, but days before revealing it, he was reported dead. No closure, no files, just another name added to the list of people who never lived to finish their story. But it doesn't stop there. Greg Kading, the former LAPD detective who later wrote a book linking Diddy to the Vegas shooting, found his work nearly buried under backlash. Projects canceled, credibility attacked, every step forward pushed 2 steps back, and he wasn't alone. Other investigators who tried to pull threads found themselves reassigned, silenced, or discredited. Here's what should make you pause. These aren't isolated events. They form a pattern. Every time proof edges close to daylight, something intervenes. People vanish. Evidence disappears. Careers implode. It feels less like coincidence and more like a wall, an invisible shield guarding certain names while everyone else pays the price for speaking up. Modern parallels and collapse. And now, decades later, history seems to be circling back. Diddy faces federal charges for trafficking, racketeering, and coercion. Prosecutors even comparing his empire to a criminal enterprise. Homes raided, files seized, witnesses too afraid to testify. The same blueprint Gene Deal described in the 90s is now being echoed in a courtroom. Different crimes, same methods: intimidation, control, silence. Now here's the haunting part. Investigators admit they've begun cross-referencing these new cases with old files tied to Tupac's death. Suddenly, names that were once whispers in sealed transcripts are back under the spotlight. The fall of Diddy's empire isn't just about present scandals. It could rip open wounds the industry has tried to bury for nearly 30 years. And that leaves us with the ultimate question. Was Tupac truly a fallen icon, or a man who chose disappearance over death? If the truth finally surfaces, it won't just rewrite hip-hop history. It will expose a legacy built on shadows, fear, and betrayal. Drop your thoughts below. Do you believe Tupac was silenced, or did he outsmart the system? Either way, this story is far from finished.